It's time to go over the fantasy team recap for the Arizona Cardinals. In this video, we're going to go over all the fantasy relevant players from this team in 2022. Let's start at the quarterback position with Kyler Murray. He had 390 attempts, which he completed 66.4% of his passes, which ended up to being 2,368 yards, which ended up being 25th in the 11 games that he played, for 14 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. He also had 67 rushes on 418 yards and 3 touchdowns. His rushing yards ended up being 7th in the NFL among other quarterbacks. He didn't have Hopkins for the first 6 games because he was suspended because of PED use, but it kind of affected him overall. He ended up tearing his ACL in week 14, which definitely puts his week 1 in doubt, but throughout the season he was having some type of turmoil with his head coach. But now, head coach Cliff Kingsbury is now fired, and the Cardinals are reportedly letting Kyler Murray be involved in the next coaching hire. Now let's switch over to the running back position and talk about James Conner. Conner had a very disappointing season this year. Injuries kept being the thing that plagues this guy. Conner had 56% of the running back snaps for this team this season and ended up with 183 rushes for 782 yards and 7 touchdowns. That led to being 30th in the league with 13 games played and 46 receptions for 300 yards and a touchdown, which ended up being 17th in 13 games played overall. I see them adding a running back in the draft or in free agency. We could be looking at Conner being more of a backup type of role in 2023. Now we're going over Eno Benjamin, who is now playing for the New Orleans Saints, but spent most of his season with the Cardinals. He was a serviceable running back in the NFL. He was a poop for fantasy football. He will not be viable in New Orleans, just like he wasn't really viable with the Cardinals. Someone who is thought to have a much larger role this year than he really had just ended up disappointing all of us. Also a disappointment for this year, Keontae Ingram. Ingram ended up with 27 rushes for 60 yards and a touchdown, along with 4 receptions for 21 yards. It doesn't really seem like he is the running back for the future for this team. He was only given 12% of the snaps per game after Eno Benjamin was released. Moving along to the wide receivers, we're going to go ahead and talk about DeAndre Hopkins. Hopkins was suspended for the first 6 games of the season, but still ended up with a respectable stat line. He ended up with 64 receptions for 717 yards and 3 touchdowns. Those yards ranked 40th in the 9 games that he played, even though he only played 9 games. 40th, that's pretty good. When Hopkins was playing, he was on the field for 88% of the wide receiver snaps. He's the main guy on this offense. And now we're going to switch it over to another wide receiver who came over in the trade with the Baltimore Ravens, and that's Marquise Brown. Brown surely made his presence felt when Hopkins wasn't on the field, averaging almost 11 targets a game. He ended up with 67 receptions for 709 yards and 3 touchdowns. Brown's a good wide receiver too for his team, but played in 12 games and had less yards than Hopkins did in 9 by the season was over. Next comes Greg Dortch. Dortch was the waiver wire beast for the first 3 weeks of the season. While Hopkins missed some time, Dortch was the man. He came into the scene and he helped many people win some of their weeks. He had a couple more flashes in week 11 and 16, but other than that, he really was quiet as the 4th fiddle on this team. He ended up with 52 receptions for 467 yards and 2 touchdowns. Lastly, for the wide receivers, we could talk about Rondale Moore, who really stepped up as one of the main guys on this football team this year while he was on the field. In the 7 games that he played in, he was on the field for 93% of the snaps. I truly believe that this was the year that he would show everyone that he does have what it takes to be a really good wide receiver in this league. He started the season with a hamstring issue, and then he ended with a groin issue. As long as he stays healthy next season, he really could take a next step and be a good wide receiver in this league. He ended up with 41 receptions for 414 yards and a touchdown. Now onto the tight end position, we could talk about Zach Ertz. I stated before the season that Zach Ertz was my bold prediction for top 5 tight end in the 2022. He actually was a top 5 tight end through 9 weeks. Then he has an ACL/MCL injury in his left knee. And then, Hurts was a huge part of this offense. He was getting 10 plus targets in 4 of the 9 games that he played in. He ended up with 47 receptions for 406 yards and 4 touchdowns. Those yards ranked 25th among other tight ends, even only playing 9 games. Now to the rookie, Trey McBride. He was the #1 rated tight end in his class in 2022. He had one real good flashy game, and then he was just being a serviceable NFL tight end for the rest of the season. He has done nothing to get me excited for the 2023 campaign. In summary, I'm going to go ahead and go over my passes and my fails for the Cardinals for the 2022 season. I'd say Kyler Murray is a pass, James Conner is a fail, Eno Benjamin is a fail, Keontae Ingram is a fail, DeAndre Hopkins was a pass, Marquise Brown was a pass, Greg Dortch is a fail, Rondell Moore is a fail, Zach Ertz, unfortunately, was a fail, and Trey McBride is definitely a fail. Now, going over the 3 passes that I had with Kyler Murray, DeAndre Hopkins, and Marquise Brown. Kyler Murray gave you what he wanted to. I mean, he was a good quarterback while he was on the field. The problem is that he was butting heads too much with the coaching staff. He never had a full complementary role of his wide receivers. Somebody was always injured. He really didn't get the long of the stick. But I think if you drafted Kyler Murray, I think you were happy with the production that he gave you while he did, and hopefully you were able to grab somebody else off of waivers or drafted a second quarterback to back him up when Kyler Murray wasn't on the field. I think you were happy with DeAndre Hopkins, even though he missed the first 6 weeks of the season. But once he came in, he was solid. Now, for the fantasy playoffs, Hopkins was MIA. He wasn't there for you. I understand that a lot of people got a lot of bad taste in their mouth, but think about why you were in the position that you were in. You took the risk. Hopkins finally came back after the 6-game suspension, and he was booming for you. He was probably either your wide receiver 1 or your wide receiver 2 if you had a stud wide receiver. You pair Hopkins up with a Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson, you were rocking and rolling. And then Marquise Brown on the other end, he was solid, especially when Hopkins wasn't on the field. I think you were able to get Marquise Brown later on in the draft, and he gave you more than enough of a payback for actually drafting him. So I think overall you were very, very happy. I appreciate all you guys for watching the video. If you would like to, hit that subscribe button, really helps me out. If you'd like to watch my way too early top 10 running backs, just click right here. See you next time.